Well, let's pick up on that last point that Sophie was making, the financing of the global transition to clean energy, dominating talks at COP28 in Dubai. You heard the Minister of Environment Barbara Creecy there speaking to the media at the South African Pavilion in Dubai. So let's check in with our SABC International News Editor, Sophie Mokoena now. Sophie, good evening. Financing pledges taking centre stage. What's the status of previous commitments that were made, and where does South Africa stand on those?
Well, South Africa is quite aggrieved that even the agreement that was reached in Paris when there was a commitment from the developed countries that they will put a sum of 100 billion US dollar to assist developing countries to implement this transition. It's not happening. Very little is available right now. And the minister was saying that they will continue to call on these developed countries to ensure that they honor the pledges. You know, it's easy to make a pledge, but when that pledge has to translate into real action, you find that some countries don't honor those pledges. Let's take a listen at what the minister had to say when I asked her about this issue of ensuring that when you look at global stock take, the issue of that 100 billion US dollar becomes a thorny one, and countries are still pushing developing countries to honor that agreement. Let's take a listen at the minister.
What we understand is that the global transition is going to require trillions of rand to mitigate CO2 emissions, but also to build adaptation in developing countries that are severely impacted on by extreme weather events. The cry of developing countries is that developed countries have not honored their historical commitments to providing 100 billion in grant financing. And what we also know is that we are not yet getting a signal as to what will be the post-2025 public finance commitment for the implementation of climate resilience and climate change objectives.
So, Sophie, let's pick up on that and pivot then to one of the other big issues, and this is the issue of the use of fossil fuels, no doubt a thorny one, especially following comments made by Sultan Al Jaber. This is the oil executive who's leading the summit around the phasing out of fossil fuels. I know that he has subsequently been reported as saying his comments were taken out of context or misinterpreted. What's the latest on that, especially where Africa and South Africa in particular stand?
Well, earlier on he had a briefing where he was able to explain, depending where you stand in terms of what he said. But looking at the fact that we are in the Middle East and the economy in this region centers around oil, it was no surprise when we were told that this is what he said. However, he has since denied that, pointing out that his discussion with Mary Robinson, member of the elders, was around what needs to be done, and him even saying that as a engineer, as someone who's very conversant with issues related to science, he does respect and agree with scientists, and whatever they are doing here is based on science, really denying the fact that he is a denialist. He was quite angry. We will put together that piece tomorrow to show what is at stake. But the reality is the United States of America, Europe, and other developed countries, they have taken a back seat here. The Middle East is in charge, and you know that the Middle East, the economy is dependent on oil, and therefore it was no surprise that there are issues. Secondly, you know that he's leading a multinational company that is doing business in oil, and therefore when he was appointed, people did have reservations in terms of the role that he is going to play. And you can see here lots and lots of oil companies. Some of them have made commitments to assist countries, but a very difficult one. Earlier on, in fact, Iman, few minutes ago, I spoke to the former Secretary of State, John Kerry, after he made a presentation here about where we are in terms of the negotiations and the world in general to address the issue of climate change. He was very, very strong, saying no way, no way. He even mentioned countries such as South Africa and the United States of America lagging behind. And therefore, you can see that there are challenges, but let's hope before the end of the conference, countries would have agreed, particularly on the issue of phasing out the fossil fuel.
Sophie, thanks for that. John Kerry is the special presidential envoy on climate that Sophie was referencing there. Thank you for those updates. It is a key moment in these discussions, and as our minister was saying, whether and speaking about whether developed countries have actually met their commitments on funding arrangements. We'll have all of these and some of the highlights from that gathering as the summit continues.